The Wizarding World of Harry Potter is one of the most successful IPs in history. Dating back to the 1990s when the first book was released, the IP has grossed over $9.6 billion in movies alone. This does not account for merch, book sales, premium video on demand, physical media, collabs with brands, and theme park sales. It remains one of the most recognizable IPs in modern history, and it's showing no signs of slowing down. Now, you guys know how much I love the Harry Potter films. They were my entire childhood, along with the books, and it's still something that I cherish and constantly come back to. But unfortunately, not everything that has come out of the Wizarding World has been good post-Harry Potter. For example, one of the worst pieces of literature I've ever read has come from this very IP. Harry Potter and the Cursed Child is so goddamn awful, I just don't register it as canon in my mind. However, right after the Cursed Child, we got introduced to the Fantastic Beasts trilogy, a trilogy that predates the original event of the Harry Potter films, a trilogy that follows a zoologist named Newt Scamander. Sort of. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them released in 2016 with decent to good reviews, along with a decent box office performance grossing $816 million worldwide, a number that solidified reassurance to the studio that the IP was still very much alive and worth expanding. Now, is this the route that I would have personally taken? No, not at all. Newt Scamander and his books aren't really important to the overall narrative of the Wizarding World. He gets mentioned maybe twice in the entire series, and mapping out a 5-movie franchise with him as a protagonist was just never going to work. I would have personally loved to see a series about the founders of Hogwarts, a story that would have followed Gotcha Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Salazar Slytherin, and Rowena Ravenclaw. And I'm not alone in this rhetoric. Anyone that has any knowledge on the lore behind the series has been dreaming of seeing the story come to life on screen. A story about the Marauders era would have been a personal dream of mine as well. But we could have also explored wizarding stories outside of Hogwarts, for example in Beauxbax and Drumstrings, Evermore. There was countless of options that the studio could have taken, and this is also one of the reasons why I hate that they're rebooting the series on HBO Max, but that's a video for another day. Now, what did we get with the Fantastic Beasts films? Well, we got a clump of ideas with no solid foundation. Now, let me elaborate. Now, Fantastic Beasts Where to Find Them follows Newt Scamander, a zoologist who comes to America to free one of his magical creatures in Arizona. In his extended layover in New York, a few of his magical creatures escape from his magical briefcase, and it's up to him to find these creatures before the American Magical Ministry finds out about them. During these shenanigans, Newt meets a fellow muggle named Jacob, Tina, an ex-Auror, and her sister Queenie. Now, I for one really like the first Fantastic Beasts film. It deviates from the original series enough to where it has its own identity, but still feels part of the Wizarding World. The characters are likable, they are for the most part well written, and the change of environment gave the film a nice breather from the previous 8 films. Exploring the Wizarding World in America was great, Eddie Redmayne never misses, and David Yates did a serviceable job with the film. But I'd be lying if I said his style of directing didn't start to bore me even this early on. I loved the score, especially this track right here. The story is very straightforward, and it's able to remind the audience why we desperately want to live in a magical world. I found the groundwork laid for Newt and Tina in this one to be adorable as hell, and it pisses me off that they get the dumbest fucking storyline in the sequel, and in Secrets of Dumbledore, Tina gets literally booted from the film. The character arcs for all of these characters are resolved by the end of the film, and it's a cute little standalone adventure in the Wizarding World. But that's all it should have been. Despite how much I like the film, I did not need a sequel, or at least not a direct sequel. There is zero reasons to bring back these groups of characters, and even if you try, it would not feel very organic. Fantastic Beasts loosely lays the groundwork for a Dumbledore and Grindelwald trilogy. Now, in the books, this is an event that is described as the biggest wizard duel of all time. This is something a lot of fans, including myself, have been eagerly waiting to see. The studio could have easily moved on from Newt Scamander and friends and started a trilogy about Dumbledore and Grindelwald. But with the studio seeing no major flaws with critics, box office, or fans, so they went right ahead with the second film, with the same characters and the same crew. And oh boy, this one is rough. Crimes of Grindelwald, I hate to say, is one of the most confusing, convoluted, unnecessary slop of a movie. A movie that retcons major aspects of the original narrative while also failing to work as a sequel, a standalone film, and an expansion to an existing lore. Crimes of Grindelwald is set 6 months after the first Fantastic Beasts film. The movie follows Gellert Grindelwald's rise to power. Along with it, we have Newt in the story for some reason. We also have his buddy to tag along in the film again. Now, it becomes clear here that this movie has way too many characters. We follow Newt, Tina, Jacob, Queenie, Theseus, Grindelwald, Dumbledore, Credence, Leta Lestrange, Yusuf, and we are introduced to Nagini. And these are just the main characters, and by main characters, I mean they have their own poster. The movie does a terrible job of balancing all these characters, and it does a terrible job at balancing the tone. But the most offensive part of the film is how it desperately tries to make Newt front and center of the trilogy.
Why can't you go?
I cannot move against Grindelwald. It has to be you.
He has no emotional stakes. I truly do not understand why the idea to have him front and center made it through so many higher-ups. Equally offensive is how they assassinated the character of Queenie Goldstein. A character who was completely inoffensive and competent in the first film is reduced to a hopeless romantic who gets sidelined 2 minutes after she's introduced. What pisses me off even more is that not only did we bring back Jacob for absolutely no reason, but the movie completely messes with the lore of the universe for this. As many have said before me, the Oblivious Curse in the original Harry Potter book was simple. Once you got your memories erased, that's it. Now imagine how the crimes of Grindelwald brings back Jacob.
You were supposed to have been obliviated. It didn't work, pal. But you said it. The potion only erases bad memories. I didn't have any.
What the fuck? David Yates also seems to be bored as hell directing these movies. Not an ounce of life was felt through his direction, which is a shame because he brought us some great moments in the Potter films such as this. And this.
Pier totum locomotor.
But in these Fantastic Beasts films, we get this. And this. The movie completely dismisses the story continuity from the expanded universe. The retcons, the plot holes are so glaringly obvious. The characters don't act or feel like they did in the original, except for Jacob. It's kind of hard to fuck up Jacob. And I wasn't a fan of whatever Johnny Depp was doing with the character. This had the potential to be so much more, but unfortunately it was just terribly forgettable and bland. Now we arrive at Secrets of Dumbledore. I like to make the comparison between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker for these two. A franchise that had some solid ideas for its first installment, but with no clear outline for the future of its trilogy. A sequel that divided the fanbase so much that the studio completely did a 180 on what was established in the previous film and tries to course correct on the last film. Secrets of Dumbledore feels like a completely different movie from the previous two films. Every single storyline that was set up from the previous installment was completely tossed out. Queenie joining Grindelwald, barely explored. Theses avenging Lita, ignored. Tina trying to save Queenie, ignored. Ezra Miller finding out his true backstory, completely useless. And you, once again, being in the story for reasons. Remember how I said I liked the little spark between you and Tina in the first movie? Well, fuck me for caring, because Tina's just not in the film at all. This time around, JK didn't write the screenplay solo, and it shows, but unfortunately it was a little too late. The movie's too preoccupied trying to right the wrongs from the previous one that it forgets to be its own movie, and the movie that we do end up getting was incredibly boring and tedious. A story about a rigged election in the Wizarding World has to be one of the most wasteful resources of this universe. Many say Crimes of Grindelwald is where the series hits rock's bottom, and while I do agree, I also think Secrets of Dumbledore is just as bad. Many people let this one slide as it was basically set up to die, but I still cannot fathom how you managed to make such a boring film in this universe. Drew Law is great. Mads Mikkelsen should have been Grindelwald since the beginning. Eddie Redmayne is perfect casting for Newt Scamander. Really like his character. I like all the original characters, but only in that first film. The soundtrack is the only thing that remains consistent in this entire, but the direction left me so fucking numb. I think David Yates needs to step away from the franchise immediately. I appreciate everything he did for the Potter films. I don't necessarily think he's a terrible director, but I do think that his time with the franchise has run out. I think 5 films was also ambitious, and whether they had a set plan or not, I think the first Fantastic Beasts film should have just remained one and done.